DOI have some quite radical proposals for local authorities, which sort of blew up earlier this year in quite a big way, saying there'd been no or lack of consultation. It seems to have disappeared over the last few months, but is starting to rear its head again. Just tell us where we're up to with this proposal.
So it's about to go to the Legislative Council, and some of those measures for viewers who may not be aware, and they include three things that the Council is really worried about. So it will give the Department of Infrastructure the ability to impact how we introduce new bylaws, how we deal with our own internal standing orders, and it'll give the Department of Infrastructure the ability to require local authorities to do anything that they consider that we should be doing. It's an open-ended process. So if they were to decide at the end of the day that local authorities have to deal with tree cutting, if we have to deal with certain types of waste collection that they currently don't do, if they have to handle certain things around library provision that some of the smaller local authorities don't have the ability to do, then costs for ratepayers are going to rise throughout the island, and that's why every single local authority that's engaged with the process has expressed their concern to sort of their local politicians, and has also expressed their concern to say, hey, listen, this will mean that rates will have to go up in the long and medium term in order to fund these commitments, and we've got no idea what these commitments are going to be going forward.
So in effect then, am I right in thinking that the rate, you in the local authorities could have all these things imposed on you that your ratepayers have given no consent to, and that you have no choice?
Yeah, that's exactly it. The way that the process should work is that people in a local authority should say, we want this to happen, and therefore we're happy to accept an additional rate or a reduction of rates or whatever in order to make that happen. But this circumvents that process of local democracy. And instead what you're going to see is the department deciding that, okay, maybe we might not be able to afford to do X, Y, and Z, therefore we're going to push this down onto local authorities, and then they're going to have to cover those costs. And that's not a democratic process. That is not a process that is accountable, and that's not a process in which local voters have any say. And that is something that we're really concerned about, is that by removing the ability of local representatives to make determination on how services are provided, you're going to get costs that you don't have the ability to consent to pay for.
And I understand that there's quite a large consensus amongst local authorities. This just isn't sort of Douglas complaining about it. We've heard of other local authorities. What feedback are you getting from fellow councillors and commissioners around the island?
It's incredible. I mean, local politicians aren't people who naturally always get on with each other in every single instance, and it's interesting to see the fact that somehow central government has managed to unite every local authority. Douglas, which we consider ourselves a city, that's controversial, but then you also have places like Peel, Castletown, Ramsey, Mourowne, Rushen, Bright, all universally agreed in the fact that these are going to impose costs that we don't have the ability to pay for. We don't have the ability to sort of fund this within current rate commitments. And we are concerned at the end of the day that ratepayers and homeowners and renters are going to have to cover costs that they didn't consent to paying.
And this is already at a time when costs of living are spiralling out of control. Yeah. What impact do you think that's going to have?
I mean, it's going to force a lot of smaller local authorities to consolidate maybe, and that might mean that a lot of local identity and a lot of local democracy has to change. It's going to have to mean that certain services, we're going to have to make a decision, do we maintain those or not, or do we cut those? And the third option is rising rates. And that when you raise rates above the rate of inflation beyond absolutely necessary, and we do fight as hard as we can to try and keep those rates increases as low as possible, that has a downstream impact on businesses. I mean, it has a downstream impact on rent. It has a downstream impact on the cost of living. And this affects people's lives in very tangible ways. We don't want people to have to make a choice between covering basic necessities, having to go on holiday, or paying a rate bill that includes items that they haven't consented and they haven't voted for.
And in terms of looking at your own, sort of getting your own house in order, what are you currently doing at Douglas City Council to drive further efficiencies to help lessen the impact on the ratepayer?
Yeah, so one thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to look toward A, modernizing a lot of our internal systems, B, trying to find out ways in which we can sort of scale our systems to the point where we can maybe sort of share certain services in order to sort of keep that efficiency. If we can build a lot more social housing, conversely, that brings additional rate income into the city, and that will, at the end of the day, reduce the amount of per capita burden on any individual ratepayer. We support developers in planning applications to build a lot more, which will have the exact same effect within the private sector. We're pushing quite hard to push on recycling policies. Controversial, but that does reduce the amount that you have to pay at the energy from waste plant, and that does provide small incomes in regards. So everything that we do is ultimately framed by our core corporate objective, which is trying to find value for money. And if members of the public and people really want to sort of contribute to that process, I really want more people to run for election, and I want more people to feed back.
And finally, what is the headline issue in terms of the costs that are being imposed on you as a local authority? Where has the big ticket items come from?
So currently the one that we've been fighting for quite a while, that is rising inflation, rising interest rate charges are really hard. And that is beyond the control of both our government and general local authority. The increased costs of freight and shipping means that building and bringing in construction materials is quite difficult, quite expensive, and staff. I think at the end of the day, trying to find a lot of staff members to fill certain positions at times can be quite difficult, and it's just trying to find that balance between, at the end of the day, paying people fairly and sort of getting that efficiency for ratepayers. And these always involve trade-offs at the end of the day. I'm happy that we are a living wage employer. I'm glad that we do pay staff well. And it's just trying to make sure that these costs remain in line, and we have to, at some point, make trade-offs as to how we handle those costs.
One of the biggest criticisms of the government is that there's too many staff. Is that something you're comfortable with the size of the staffing at Douglas City Council, or do you think there's further reviews to be done there in reducing the size, maybe through when people retire, not replacing them? Where do you see you're at with regard to the size of your administration?
So we've actually pretty much pared a lot of things down to the bone. The council used to be a much larger organisation in terms of staff, and what we've aimed to do is do a lot more with less. So for example, our housing authority has, so social housing and rates completely separate, they have got completely separate funding, but we manage 2,500 properties, maybe a third of £1 billion in assets, with a fairly small team. And we've managed to pare that down, and it's just, we've reached that point now that if you were to reduce staff anymore, that would end up having an impact on frontline services. A lot of concerns also have to do with internal government regulations. You have to follow certain HR procedures. You have to have certain legal procedures that you follow through. So there comes a point where you can pare down only so much. Public authorities and private sector have different objectives at the end of the day. So it's about trying to find that balance, as boring as that answer might be.